So the next topic is after the donor area, we are going to discuss the recipient area, and Viral Desai is going to come on the stage and present his experience of recipient area complications after hair transplant. Viral is a practicing hair transplant and a cosmetic surgeon. He's a plastic surgeon, and I think now everybody would be recognizing him. No, he has taken my place actually. People who are coming to HairCon, they are so used to that, somebody standing up and going up. So today I thought that let me take the back seat, but he was not able to sit back.
Well, sorry about that, guys, but it just came from the bottom of my heart. Now, talking about complications or undesirable results, what are they? I was trying to see the definition. So, one paper said there is no agreed upon definition. Another one said, Daniels et al., that episodes that may affect patient outcome or that require intervention, further diagnostic tests or monitoring. So these are complications, they are intraoperative, postoperative, anesthesia related, surgery related, post-op, early or late onset, donor or recipient. My talk is going to be on recipient area complications. So early onset could be crusting, pain, edema, bleeding. Some of them are sequel, they're not really complications. Graft dislodgements, hiccups, pruritus, wound dehiscence, recipient area, medical complications and aesthetic. Now medical central area necrosis, folliculitis, which is seen very commonly nowadays, effluvium, aesthetic complications, unnatural appearance, cobblestoning, poor density, poor growth, asymmetries, pluggy look, poor planning, hyperpigmentation, ingrown hair or kinking of the hair. Now edema, this will cause, it's basically you positioning headbands, massage and cold packs can help, medications, corticosteroids or NSAIDs. Bleeding hematoma, avoid any kind of anticoagulants for a week before surgery or at least 4 days before surgery and 2 to 3 days after. Make sure that BP is maintained throughout. Keep incisions limited to the avascular planes. Don't make very deep or very large incisions. If you're using implanters, tend to go at an acute angle. If you go straight in, you tend to hit the blood vessels. There is going to be more bleeding, more hematoma, and of course, definitely more popping and handling of grafts. Crusting forms in the first couple of days. It can remain for 5 to 10 days, or I've even seen some patients who have it for even up to a month if it's not handled properly. Prevention is by wet compresses, frequent saline sprays. Treatment is by topical ointments, beta scrub washes. Dilute hydrogen peroxide can be very helpful. You must dilute it. Hydrogen peroxide can be toxic otherwise to the graft, so it has to be highly diluted. Graft dislodgements, if it does happen for whatever reasons, put the graft in cold water containing salt or contact lens solution. Ask the patient to immediately get them and reimplant them. How many survive? They do. Hiccups due to irritation of the phrenic nerve, chlorpromazine antacids, proton pump inhibitors, viscous xylocaine. Pruritus, both at the donor and recipient area. Mild topical steroids will help, and of course antihistaminics. Now recipient area complications, central area necrosis. We have been using implanters mostly, so I haven't really got a case, but I've seen a couple of cases otherwise. Frontal or mid-scalp is a common site. Reason is, of course, very large recipient pockets, deep pockets, which will cause damage to the blood vessels, very extremely dense packing, or in high-risk patients like smokers or who have other high-risk factors. Prevention is by decreasing the use of epinephrine. Now, I would concur that we don't use adrenaline anymore in the recipient area. We don't use at all. We use in the donor area sometimes, but never in the recipient areas. Of course, treatment is debridement. If it's large area, you may require scalp excision, suturing. You may require some rotational flaps. Or finally, let it heal and you can use follicle unit grafts to cover this area. Now, folliculitis, the incidence, we have been seeing a lot of cases of folliculitis. Sometimes recently, they could be because of poor technique or poor hygiene conditions, or maybe because of poor patient selection. I went to the literature, incidents were from 1.1 to up to 15%. The risk factors were oily complexions, seborrheic scalp dermatitis, scalp infections, poor personal hygiene, and of course, poor operative setups. When you're using implanters, sharp instruments, and you don't sterilize them properly, we have been doing ETO now for all the cases. ETO is essential if you're using sharp instruments. Just putting them in Sidex is not enough. Sometimes you can double wrap them and do double autoclaving, but ETO is the safest way. And of course, unsterile gauze is also another reason. Cysts, they occur in the recipient areas few months after the surgery. The cause is, one theory was entrapment of the follicle, second is infection, third is distortion of the pore structure and skin. It could be a short-term or long-term autoimmune reaction. And if the hair follicles are damaged or subluxated or pushed deeper into the skin layers and piggybacking. Now, possible reason going in details, entrapment of the follicles in the reticular dermis and a foreign body reaction leading to implantation cysts. These are normally not infected. They can resolve over time, or they may need some needling, puncture and needling and draining of the cyst. Infection, rare, you have to administer preoperative and postoperatives. Routinely, we give antibiotics for 5 days. Broad spectrum antibiotics, mainly covering skin pathogens, gram-positive. Acute or subacute or chronic infections can occur. I think we got a couple of cases of atypical mycobacterium recently, and I think when I was talking to other people also, this kind of cases have been reported. Going into details of it, probably the cause was tap water or also saline water, which we are using routinely. And there were reports that the tap water which we are using routinely to wash the scalp, the tap water contains atypical mycobacteria, and especially atypical mycobacterium Shelloni. That is what was common. Now, of course, distortion of pore structures and skin surface. The sebaceous gland may survive, secrete sebum, foreign body response, which is walled off due to this irritating nature. These cysts contain sterile sebum. It may be thin or thick-walled. Thin-walled normally will rupture on the skin surface by themselves, or you may need to do some kind of intervention and scoop out the cyst. Autoimmune reaction, both short and long term. And of course, I've talked about pushing the grafts deeper or subluxated. Now, most of the physiological cysts will resolve in 4 to 12 weeks. Folliculitis will resolve. They're sterile. They may not require much of intervention, but if it doesn't, then you have to do and you have to send. Every time you get a case of folliculitis, please send the pus for culture, sensitivity, send it for fungal culture, send it for atypical and typical mycobacterium. This is my experience. Send it at the first go, don't keep waiting for it. Most of these times the cysts are not going to cause a problem. This is some of the cases we've treated. Compression bandage given post-operative, sometimes by needling, sometimes we put a small scoop, a tiny scoop is taken, a stab incision is taken and scooped out, and sometimes you need excision. You can see out here, and the hair has grown. Later on, you can see that hair has grown in the cyst. So that's why it wasn't infected. If it is infected, the hair follicles will get damaged. Treatment is, of course, prevention is better. Treat the seborrhea thoroughly before you take up the patient for surgery. Treat if there is fungal infection. Give it enough time for it to settle, and then do a very thorough, we do a beta scrub head wash. Ask the patient to do it before he comes to us in previous night. And in the morning, we do it before the surgery. Proper aseptic OT precautions, very important. If you're doing hair transplants in small setup, in small clinics, make sure it's not only about the emergency equipment, but also make sure that proper aseptic precautions are followed. Now, it's a routine policy to fumigate the OT every night. Every night after the surgery, we normally fumigate the operation theatre. Sterilization of instruments and disposables. I think here we are using, if you're using implanters, your punches, I've heard when using motorized punches, a lot of surgeons have told me that they use not it for 2, 3, 4 cases. They put it in Sidex and they use it for 2, 3, 4 cases. I don't think those are the best practices. The punches have to be disposed. Another advantage of using manual is you cannot reuse it. So the moment the punch is blunt, you throw it. Of course, using implanters, like I mentioned earlier, ETO sterilization is very, very important. Don't just rely upon putting it in 20 minutes in Sidex. ETO has to be done for all the needles and for all the implanters. Medical measures, broad spectrum antibiotics, washes, warm compresses so that the pus comes. A dictum, we follow the surgical dictum. Wherever there is accumulation of pus, it has to be drained. Needle puncture, compression, incision drainage, or finally excision has to be done. Effluvium, temporary loss, also termed as shock loss. Basically, you just make sure right patient selection, nutritional therapy, cyclical therapy, starting it before surgery will help. And of course, minoxidil can prevent this. Aesthetic complications, unnatural appearance, incorrect angle, sorry, I'm running out of time, poor direction, poor density. We see some of these results. It's rare now, but it's, poor designing, poor direction, depth, angle, You have to sometimes correct it. The very harsh and straight hairline, we remove the grafts and we use the grafts again to increase the density posteriorly. Another case where we removed all the grafts which were not in the proper place and used them. Very difficult cases using a combination of few grafts left. We try to give him some kind of density and some results. Buried grafts, again a repair case. Cobblestoning is because of improper depth. The hole is too small. This occurs. Another case, hyperpigmentation, kinking. Case corrected. So just a word of caution that a busy surgeon will always have complications. A good surgeon knows how to handle these complications and how to further prevent it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So can we have Suneet Soni now? I tell my patients when they ask that, have you ever had complications? I said that yes, I have had. I've been operating, and when you operate, you are bound to have some complication. The only way not to have any complication is not to operate. So when you will operate, you will have problems. So the next topic is managing hair transplant cripple, and we have Suneet Soni. Suneet Soni is a very successful hair transplant surgeon and a cosmetic surgeon from Jaipur. So he's going to discuss and share his thoughts about how to manage the hair transplant cripple.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'll be discussing and focusing more on the implantation part or the designing part, because most of the time we see in patients who are coming unsatisfied are more unsatisfied maybe because of unnatural looks or decreased density than their expectation or coverage which they are not satisfied with. So how to manage these cases in which previously they have been operated but they came with unsatisfied results. So I will be reviewing my around 2000 cases from last 7-8 years, around 200 cases in which we have done revisions, mostly for hairline correction density. So the challenges are generally the depleted donor area because of previous surgery, and grafts extraction. There are extra grafts which are required to correct the hairline and cover the areas. So we have to assess the causes of previous hair transplant failure. So previous photographs might be effective to assess how was the previous condition before the surgery, and present is in front of you. So you have to search for the patient factors. Sometimes they are on anabolic steroids which may cause the poor growth in previous surgery. We have to assess the donor area properly. We have to wait at least for 1 year before embarking to the second surgery, so that the previous surgery should have the proper outcome, whatever is expected in 1 year. So generally we need more grafts, so I plan for combination like strip, FUE and beard or body hair transplant to correct the outcome. So I will be reviewing some cases. This was one of case which received with punch grafted. You can see the doll's eye appearance or the paddy field appearance with punches on the donor area. The donor was also damaged. So we adopted strip harvest with microfollicular unit transplant. Again, the follicular unit size should be of micro hair follicular, like single, double or triple hair graft. It should not be bunches like 6 hair, 7 hair. So this is after around 2100 grafts by FUT. So hairline could be corrected and made much natural and presentable. A case was reported with less density after previous surgery. There was a previous strip surgery done somewhere else. Main reason which I found might be the damage rate, which might be high in strip harvest, dissection and implantation. So we have to be very precise while harvesting. We have to make sure all the steps should be done with microscopic magnification with proper tissue handling technique. Graft should be handled with as less as possible damage and should be kept always hydrated. We use operating microscopes for all slivering, graft cutting, almost 5x, 10x. Sometimes we use video assisted microscopes in difficult cases with 200x magnification. So how to handle a graft is very important. You have to teach and monitor that whether your technicians are doing the things properly. There should be a proper monitoring technique. The handling of graft should be above the skin level as much as possible. We should not touch the root or the shaft. So we have, while removing the extra epidermis and dermis, we have to hold the hair above the skin level as much as possible. It should be under saline every time so that it should not be dehydrated. So dehydration and improper tissue handling is the main cause of damage of hair in strip harvest dissection. So almost 3,800 grafts were implanted in the same patient, and this is the outcome. Patient was happy with the coverage and the hairline, which was looking pretty natural. As we have discussed, over harvest of FE is nowadays very commonly encountered. There was a patient who was being operated somewhere else for around 4,000 grafts by FE. The donor was depleted and the outcome was poor, mostly because the higher damage rate during the extraction, and the donor might be poor previously also. So we have to plan something out of the box. We planned strip surgery, an unorthodox method. We have to plan 4 different strip surgery in different part, not a linear thing. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 different strips. So closure was easily possible. We can harvest good number of grafts. We have extracted extra grafts from the beard too, and almost 4,600 grafts were quite sufficient to cover the frontal and the central part and give a natural filling and the hairline design. Another case we encountered with previous hair being extracted from pubic side, and the hairline looks pretty unnatural with a poor donor area, and the thinning and the density was also less at the donor area. Again, we have to plan something which is very risk taking. We have planned a strip harvest. This was the previous hairline design, which looks like a fence, a straight thick hair. Obviously pubic hair are much thicker, and angle and direction was poor. Around 2,000 grafts by strip surgery, micro hair follicular units were planted in irregular fashion to give a natural looking hairline design in front of previous hairline. So this was the outcome 10 months, and patient was pretty happy with the naturalness of the hairline design and the looks which he received after the second transplant of revision. So this was the previous hairline, which was looking unnatural, straight like a fence, and this was after correction. So hairline design is a very precise technique. It should be done with proper aesthetic sense, with single hair grafts in the frontal area with proper angulation and irregular pattern. A case was received with previous 2 surgeries. One was FUT, second was FUE. After 2 surgeries also he was not happy. The reason behind the hairline design was not proper. It was pretty straight. The hair angulation was not proper, almost 90 degrees in front. There are multiple hair grafts in the frontal area, giving it a cobbled appearance or a thick doll's eye appearance. The density distribution was also not proper. It looks like a fence or a stadium look. The back area seems to be pretty empty. So correcting all the things, we have to properly design the hairline, which was pretty on the back side. We have to remove all the unnaturally placed hair. I used FUE extraction for technique for removing the hair from unnatural sides. So all unnaturally planned in improper direction and angulation with unsightly hairs were removed. So this was by FUE, and implanting again new hairs which we harvested by strip and FUE combination. So we have to extract the grafts which are at unnatural position and unnatural direction with multi-hair grafts in front, and re-implant in proper angle and direction. If we are planting the same area, we have to wait for almost 6 to 8 months for planting in the same area. If we are planting on back side, we can go in the same sitting, or in front, same sitting. So after correcting the hairline, this was the final outcome, and you can see the proper distribution is also important. As we see, it looks natural because of the proper distribution. The hairline, this was the previous hairline with thicker grafts, double hair grafts in front, a straighter hairline, and proper angulation was 90 degree. Now the angulation is almost 25-30 degrees of the scalp. There are single hair grafts in front, and proper distribution of hair is also important. Again, an unnatural looking hairline, patient was observed with almost feminine hairline. The reason behind was the side temporal recessions were covered, and he was definitely not happy with this outcome. Again, we have to remove these hairs which are unnaturally placed in the corners, both temporal recessions, and place new grafts in proper angle direction and cover it properly. So this was the outcome after 10 months. Obviously, patient was satisfied with proper hairline design. He was looking natural compared to previous surgery. Another patient with poor hairline design, poor growth, poor coverage. We have to plan combination surgery with FUT and FUE and a proper hairline design, and this was the 10-month post-op outcome. Patient was pretty happy because he was looking natural and fuller. So just 4,000 grafts is done properly can cover a bigger area, and if all the aesthetic sense are taken care of, we can cover the things in natural looking pattern. You can see the natural hairline is much more aesthetically pleasing compared to others. So in close view, you can observe how we make a natural hairline. There are single hair grafts in frontal area with proper angulation and irregular pattern. We made a temporal triangle in this patient. Because we use single hair grafts in temporal triangle, that look pretty natural. Again, you can compare the previous temporal triangle and now after constructing the temporal triangle. This is again a closer look of hairline design. So aesthetically, it is very important to design hairline in natural pattern and taking all the precautions to cover larger areas, maybe with FUT, FUE or beard hair combination. So on summarizing, hairline correction and correction transplant surgery requires multiple things to be searched for. We have to be very sure that we can do both combination of strip and FUE to extract more grafts. Aesthetically, we have to very much experience to correct the previous design. We should be very sure how to correct it. Thanks for the patient listening.
Thank you, Suneet. Thank you very much. So we move on to the next talk, which is going to be given by Dr. Venkatram Mysore, Managing Patient Expectation and Avoiding an Unhappy Patient.
Now, this is one important part of both the counseling and then subsequent handling of the patient. We often use the word realistic expectations. So now, what are the patient's expectations that the patient has? Are they always reasonable? Is it possible to meet every expectations of every patient? Or are doctors responsible for heightening these expectations by sometimes their exaggerated advertisements and hype? What is meant by realistic expectations? These are the issues that let us look at. Now, these are all the expectations of a patient that I can imagine. He will want to get all the hairs back. He will want a perfect look. He will want the same density that he once upon had. He will want the hairs to last for a lifetime. He doesn't want pain. He doesn't want scar. He will want to retain the donor hairs as they are. He will want hair transplantation at 1 rupee per graft. And he will want the particular doctor to do everything. He will not want to take any drugs due to side effects. And he will not want any kind of side effects at all. Now, when I meet things like this, I tell him that this is not possible. Only God can meet expectations. And in case of patient with androgenetic alopecia, even God has failed because he didn't retain the hairs. Now, where are we with respect to ideal hair restoration? Can we assure an excellent cosmetic outcome? Yes, in most cases. Can we assure that all the hairs that we put can grow? Well, most of them grow anyway. Can we assure preservation of donor hair follicles? No. Can we assure no scarring? Minimal scarring, definitely. Safe and comfortable procedure? Yes. Short treatment duration, it is getting shorter, but it is still quite long. No recovery time, well, it is minimal with FUE. Expensive, that's a question mark. Can we give good result in all cases? Most cases, yes. Can we prevent future baldness? Yes, to some extent, if patient is willing to take drugs. Now, these are the kind of advertisements which I feel are responsible for some of the unrealistic expectations that patients have. I think we should desist from this. We should not indulge in hype, otherwise we only will face the consequences. Then this is exemplified by the fact that doctors rarely present bad cases. I put up a post on our group. If you have any difficult case or a bad case, please send the details. I will hide the identity and present. Nobody sent a case. Now, look at this patient. This 65-year-old mother, her son was studying in America. She came to my clinic. She had a list of 7 doctors across India in different cities. She had a list of 22 questions and she was traveling to each city to ask those 22 questions, and then she would decide which doctor would operate her son. Now, one of the questions which she asked me in front of me was, "Doctor, how good are you? Has any of your case failed?" Now, I got very irritated by this question, but she was an elderly lady, so I had to be polite to her. I said, "Madam, you should not ask these kind of questions." He said, "No, doctor, but I have to do a background check." I said, "You do a background check in the background. Don't do it in front of my front ground." So ultimately, the lady, I do not know whether she went on to another city to contact another doctor, but this gives an idea of the kind of expectations people have. Now, there is a near obsession with scar. People don't want to have any kind of scar. So it was the case with FUT, but unfortunately it is becoming so with FUE also. Now, for example, this patient has had a beard transplant. Obviously the density is less. Now you can see that there are some hypopigmented areas also here. Now he is very unhappy that this part of the beard is less dense than this part. And he is getting married, he is very concerned with it. And then in particular, he is concerned with these hypopigmented scars in this area. Now, particularly in South Indian skin, they do become hypopigmented. Remember, hair follicles are the reservoir of melanocytes also. So, if you remove the hair follicle, you are also removing that reservoir. So, the FUE might heal without too much of texture, but it will heal with hypopigmentation. And that is not liked by patients, particularly in a South Indian brown color. So, this patient now wants these things to go. So, he is looking at options like TCA application, fractional laser, or he is asking me whether I can put some more hairs here. So, now doing these kind of things will often mean a meaningless procedure because you did this to avoid a scar formation. Now, this is a patient who has had both FUT as well as FUE. Those dots are actually the FUE scars. This line is FUT scar. As has been shown earlier, a very well done FUE can heal very well. As you can see here, very nice scar. But now, the other obsession is with density. This patient has had a fairly good density, but he is very much bothered that this corner is not looking that great for him. I think 10 years back, 15 years back, patients like this would have been pretty happy. But now, these patients are coming back to fill up this particular area. But what is more important, if you see, some hairs have remained small despite adequate time. It's almost after 9 or 10 months. But see these hairs, they are there, but they haven't grown very well. Now, this is one issue which I have seen quite a few cases, in many cases, not just mine, but elsewhere also. Why do these hairs remain small? Why doesn't it grow further? This was discussed yesterday, but I don't think we had a sufficiently good answer to this. Now, why are patients so obsessed with every small aspect after hair transplantation? They even will compare whether it is 1 millimeter low on one side, whether 10 grew on one side, 8 grew on the other side. Why is this so? I think this is because most patients have minor variant of a body dysmorphophobia. I think that is why they came to you in the first place to do a surgery. We like it at that time because they came to us, but when they keep coming back with small little complaints, we don't like that. Second, of course, is the social media, Instagram, YouTube, whatever, they compare the results and then they feel unhappy. Now, hair transplantation, you get a final great result as a result of a number of small steps together. Every single step is important, and failure doesn't mean that half the hairs don't grow. 30 hairs not growing in one area can still spoil the happiness of the patient. So it is important that every single step goes right. So how to tackle this? One, of course, is educating the patient and underplaying expectations. Now, we keep using the word realistic expectations. What is realistic? Are you conveying those things in the right way? And is he understanding in the right way? Even if he has understood at that time, is he going to remember 6 months or 9 months down the line that you indeed had explained this? So this is where the realistic expectation concept has to be remembered. And then, of course, you should identify some red herrings which help you to identify such patients. Now, often what happens is the initial consultation, patient comes, it's just exploratory. You don't know whether he will do the surgery or not. And then after some time, you find that he has already booked it. He doesn't come back for a second consultation. Likewise, many consultations are in email where some explanations cannot happen. And particularly, WhatsApp consultation, I think, should be avoided because it is extremely brief. Now, I often have I keep this particular slide when he asks what kind of density I will get. Once I showed this patient, is this enough for you? Patient said, no, I think this area is not so good. And if he said that, I said, I will not operate you because your expectations are more than what I can meet. So the consent form should state these things. What is the density expected? Who will do what? What will be done by technician? What will be done by the doctor? Should document what materials have been read by him. Particularly should document hairline design. And we do video documentation of every hair transplant consultation just before the surgery, and we preserve that video. I think this is extremely important. And then, of course, very important that he signs while going home that he is in a good state. His accompanying person should sign that. Yeah, I think now consent form is one thing that I was dealing. I have already dealt with it. Consent forms should be in detail, and make sure that you have a different consent form for every different procedure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I think the time has come when we should go in for video consent. Even once we have decided what will be the hairline design and who is going to do which part, we make sure that we take that consent on the video separately. Not the full consultation, but just the 3 steps after the surgery. So moving forward, we are going to have, now that we know the patients have become unhappy, so we should ask Dr. Manoj Khanna to how to tackle these unhappy patients. I hope we will not make some people unhappy over there. I'm suspecting.
In the morning I spoke nothing about FUE, but there's so much fraud about FUE anyway. Some people will naturally be unhappy. The biggest problem in your practice today with active social media and everything else is tackling an unhappy patient. And there will be unhappy patients. If a surgeon who says, I have never had any complication, well, he's a champion. Probably doesn't do too much surgery. For you cannot be a surgeon with doing a lot of surgery and not have complications. So unhappy patient can be for 2 reasons. Either the patient has had a poor result, you are at fault, or you have made a poor choice. There again you are at fault. Remember, I tell this in many meetings, every line of medicine has an allied surgical line. Cardiology, cardiothoracic surgery, neurology, neurosurgery, urology, neurosurgery, psychiatry, cosmetic surgery. All patients have a psychiatric element in them when they come for cosmetic surgery. I'm thankful to this gentleman, Dr. Arumugam, who was my teacher, is also Dr. Ramchandran's teacher. He allowed me to sit in his consultation whenever I was visiting him, and I visited him about a number of 6-8 times. And that really taught me a lot of things. A lot of guys come to me for observation, and I let them sit in my consultation. But that is probably the biggest learning you have when you are going to a person. So when an unhappy patient comes to you, I'm not talking about the psychiatric group. The first thing you must do is listen quietly to the patient. Take 5 minutes, take 10 minutes, take 15 minutes, listen. The moment a person gets his outburst out, he's much lighter. He will then be in a mood to talk, discuss, understand with you. Don't interrupt. Never argue. The moment you argue, it becomes a battle. And that battle is very difficult to win because you are with somebody who has come with an idea he's won already. Never try to defend yourself when you're in an argument with an unhappy patient. See, I did this, but this. No, don't say that. Well, I tried my best. It was a best effort. Something did not go wrong, right. I've done it so many times. It happened. Maybe in your case there was some problem. It could have been a problem with you or with me. We really don't know. Talk in this way with very humble, polite manner and try to explain to him that you have tried your best. Something has gone wrong somewhere. We don't know. Medicine is not mathematics. 2 plus 2 always does not make 4. It can make 3, it can make 5, it may 10, I don't know what to make. It can be infinity. So you have to explain this to the patient. If I did the same surgical procedure on 10 people, the same way with everything same, the results are different because the human body responds differently to different things and it is not mathematics. You must be, for a patient who is unhappy and you know he's unhappy and there's something wrong, be sympathetic for the patient. You must feel for the patient. You must feel as if it happened to your family member, your son, your father, your mother, your brother, your brother-in-law, anybody else. And try and tell yourself, what can I do for him? What would be best to do for him? Remember, an unhappy patient can be very harmful to you. As Dr. Venkat just mentioned, social media is a big problem. And correcting a mistake, when you correct the mistake in that particular patient, the patient is very happy. He understands that you have tried to help him. You are a genuine person. You have a positive approach. And 99.999999% do it for free. Don't charge him anything. Pay from your pocket. He will be very happy. Also, it's important when this has happened and you've managed to convince the patient and you agree to do something for him, that you retrospectively think what went wrong. What is it which was done, which was incorrect? Was my consultation wrong? Did I promise too much to the patient? Did I say I'll do so and showed him the moon, which is not possible? Was there a problem in the surgical procedure? Was some surgical step not right? Were the grafts out for too long? Were the cutting not right? Were the slits too close? Were the slits too far, etc., etc.? Give it a good look. Was the follow-up right? Did I give the instructions right? Did he follow them right? Because when you introspect, then only you will find the cause of your problem and probably correct it in the future. It is very, very important here that do not criticize your colleagues. I work with a doctor called Shashank Chatterjee, who I call my guru, who is a professor at plastic surgery at IPJMER in Kolkata, and he says, whenever you criticize somebody, 50% of that sin of that somebody, uska paschachat tumko karna padega. You will have to suffer. You will have to pay that rent. If you think that by criticizing somebody you are going to achieve something, remember it will come back to you, and I do not know right or wrong, but 50% of it you might have to suffer and might have to repay that debt. Never criticize your colleague. Never speak bad about anyone in front of the patient. If he has made a blunder, don't tell the patient he's made. Say the doctor must have tried, there must have been a problem. You'll say, you can call up your junior later on and say, yaar, kya kiya, pagal aadmi hai. But don't say it in the front of the patient. And remember, if somebody else talks bad about you behind you, how do you feel? You don't feel nice. You feel horrible. You feel like giving a smack to that guy. It's the very same thing. Criticizing your colleague, saying bad words about your colleague does no good to you, but actually harms you in the long run. Let me give you an example of a patient of mine. This patient came to me for a hair transplant in the front. I had done a hair transplant for his friend with a very good result. They are in the media industry, advertisement. I was very confident of very good result because I have getting good density, good packing in the front, everything went well, the surgery was good, there was no problem. I was sure of a good result. And I tell him, many patients will say, you'll have a fantastic result. Tell them in advance. This patient came back to me after 3 months, after 4 months, after 6 months, we're following up, blah, blah, blah. 9 months, I was not happy. I look at the patient told me, Doctor Sahab, aap chintit lag rahe ho. I was not happy. I didn't find the density that much. I said, maybe sometimes the hair grow a little later, it may take time, let's do 6 PRPs free, let's do whatever we can. We'll try and see something, or we'll take a call. He was patient, but he was very unhappy. The patient was very well placed and very well connected. He owns one of the biggest chains in Mumbai for advertisements. He went to numerous doctors. He went to India, places all over India. He went to Italy, he went to Turkey. He was in Germany for a meeting, went there. And different people gave different opinions. Somebody said your hairline is world class, but the density is not good. Somebody says ki maybe the grafts did not take well. Somebody says the graft something was wrong. Some doctors in India are very smart and they said, oh, he did not put so many grafts. Oh, this guy did not do anything. They made number of personal remarks. This is done by Manoj Khanna. That guy, one of the guys said that. The back and forth we kept talking. He had gone to a surgeon, and the surgeon, what he did, he had a very smart looking girl in his office who took her to a big front screen, took the photo and zoomed it. So much gap, you see, not good. Hairline, not right. Temporal angle, not right. Marketing done, probably to try and get himself to be, and he showed some great results. See, my result is this, my density is blah, 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 blah. And he told the patient, you've had a bad choice. Patient sent me a legal notice. I told him, if you are very happy that surgeon that you went to, he's one of juniors of mine, you please go and do the surgery there, I'll pay your bill. Who are you to pay my bill? I will make a choice. Again somebody will butcher me. All of you are thugs. I took everything quietly. I kept talking and talking to him till his friend who had a good result convinced him that he's a well-known guy. And other doctors, some doctors said, no, Manoj Khanna is very well-known, a lot of surgery is done, something may have gone wrong, go back to him. He says, I want to do the surgery with you, doctor, and I will pay you your full bill. I said, do whatever you want. I did a big surgery for him. I transplanted grafts again. I charged him nothing. Even the post-mortem medicines I got, which I get to all the patients and they are paying for that, I gave it to him free. I said, boss, it's not that I am scared of you. It's not that I am worried about you. I feel bad because you underwent something. I did something with my best ability, but somehow it's not worked. I'm still waiting for the follow-up, but I hope it's okay. So prevention is better than cure. Your colleagues must be careful in spreading wrong information. Advertisement is very wrong. And please don't use morphed images and touched images to entice patients. Don't do that. I'll give you a small example. This is my patient, Yusuf Pathan and Irfan Pathan. And we exchange once in a while this thing. And he sent me a picture with so much of hair. And Yusuf never had so much of hair. So I wrote to him, ये क्या ड्रामा किया भाई? Yusuf writes, कुछ नहीं है किया, powder डाला है और नाटक किया है. And he sends me a picture of his, what he looks like. I have never used this picture of Yusuf Pathan advertisement because people will think he's got so much of hair. I was shocked the other day when I saw on the net a picture of a well-known personality with a hair transplant, a fantastic result. Wow, beautiful, very nice, excellent. I know this guy, he's very good. I also am the owner of a recording company in Kolkata. My friend and me, we own that. And we called this gentleman to sing a few songs for us in pujas in the month of September, 9 months after the surgery. What I find? That picture is all wrong. He looks like this. He's no more like that near the picture that he's shown. Huge difference. So this picture, there is something definitely wrong. Either you've used fiber or you used powder or you've done some lighting, which is different. And then another picture now, which shows him like this. Please don't do these things. This is not right. This creates a wrong impression. People in the society think this is possible. You can never do a hair transplant with density like a normal thick-haired person. You are misleading people and actually misleading and harming your own society for people have wrong impressions. So be ethical with your patients. Anyone can have unhappy patients, but be compassionate. I tell to this to my friends, three people go to are always unhappy. A police, doctor and a lawyer, nobody goes smiling. They have a problem. Be compassionate, listen to them. If you feel you have not performed 100%, do something free. Never have an unhappy patient. It can be disastrous. My congratulations once again to Sattur and everybody else for a very good hair con. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
So being compassionate is the message. So I would request. Why are you even confirming? Why are you confirming? I'm talking to the house. No, I'm taking the message forward because I never wanted you to go down because I have to call you back on the stage again. Because we have now got a panel discussion on complications. Dr. Venkat, Sumit, Viral, and one more. We have Sunit Soni. So, Dr. Sattur, how much time do we have? 20 minutes? Okay. I thought it will be 15 minutes. Yeah, working tea and coffee is there. And a couple of announcements. We will be having the general body meeting over here at 6:30 in the evening. Plus, there is going to be skit before that, which has been directed by none other than Dr. Anil Garg. And you will see a couple of more people in a different colors and costumes. And hear different type of sounds. Okay, so we have got 15 minutes, and then tomorrow there will be a valedictory function at 10:30 a.m. Yeah. So the certificates have to be given after the AGM because it has to be approved by the annual general body meeting.
Please don't go. You're going to miss something very important. Don't
Yes.
go, please. Sit down. Hello. Oh, bhaiya. कहाँ जा रहे हो यार? बैठो यार.
थोड़ी देर 10, maybe for some 10-15 minutes, please stay back. 15 minutes, it's a very important topic. So we are going to cover the donor area complication, recipient area, and how to tackle these patients. So my question is that how many of you have seen a complication in a donor area out of the total patients operated by you? So the choices are 1, 2, 3, 4. Less than 1%, 1 to 5%, 5 to 10, and greater than 10%. Suneet.
So complication should be graded as severe, minor, moderate. Minor complications. So
Not the
complications should
sequel.
be,
I am talking of complications which
Com-
both of them.
complication of donor area
Right.
should be graded before asking this question because it can be a bigger complication or a smaller. So if we see complication like minor scarring, it can be higher percentage, or major scarring could be as a percentage.
So in general, I am saying that you operate 100 patients. So how many patients
Maybe 1
you
to
feel like-
5%. 1 to 5%. B. 1 to second.
1 to 5%. Dr. Manoj.
0%. No, 5 to 10%.
5 to 10%.
1 to 5%.
Good.
1 to 5.
Okay, so there is nobody who does not have any complications, as Dr. Manoj Khanna said and Venkat sir also highlighted. So you are bound to have some complications, and I think 5 to 10% is a very realistic number. And Dr. Manoj, do you think is it because you have been doing more of strips as No, that's
Again, he wants me to talk. I have had lot of complications with my FUE scars.
yes. FUE. I have a picture for both. So let me take up the FUE part first, because otherwise again it will come to that it's all against strip. So it's FUE are
Viral?
Viral,
Why?
idhar. So how do you manage this patient, Viral? This is a patient who had undergone Truce. Do you have the mic, please? Viral, the question for you.
So I'm losing the
How
patient.
how often do you see a picture like this of over harvesting? You can see in the front over there, screen. How often you see a picture like this?
Maybe around 4 to 3 to 5%. Maybe I have seen pictures like this. Some of them previously operated by us, some of them operated outside. Well, the way to manage today is by micropigmentation, SMP. SMP is a good solution for this kind of scars.
Good. So anybody, and when did you see it in your own patient? You said that some of your previously operated patients, what was the number of grafts which was taken out after which you started seeing some thinning of the area?
I don't think the problem was removing too many grafts. I think the problem was trying to, sometimes removing too many grafts from one area.
Okay.
So, sometimes the transition to manage to remove little patchy appearances in certain areas. So, of course, with time that got better and better, but that is what I have seen.
Okay. So one of the things which I always say while harvesting is you should not take out contiguous grafts or the continuous grafts. Do it in a zigzag fashion which becomes irregular so that when the grafts are taken out and the rest of the hair grow, you don't come to know from where the grafts have been taken. And another thing which I have observed in these cases is that when we do the cherry picking and all the good grafts have been taken out, especially in cases where 5,000, 6,000 have been supposedly attempted, there is a tendency to have a microvascular trauma. So the hair which are left behind, the caliber of their hair decreases. And coverage value is a multiple of number of hair which is left behind, which is already decreased because you have taken out all the good grafts, multiplied by the caliber of the hair. So when the number of hair is going to be more of singles and the caliber is going to decrease maybe 30 to 50%, the coverage value which will be coming up will be less, leading to more of the visibility of the area. And as Viral has said, that we can do SMP. SMP is one of the most common things that we now recommend for this group of patients. And for this patient, what we did was we actually harvested grafts from the beard and then put them on the temporal sides. And the third thing which you can use is you can ask the patient to grow the hair long. If possible, it might get covered. So there are just three things if you come across a patient of over harvesting, that will be number one SMP, number two will be harvesting of body hair, and number three can be growing long hair. Okay. So this is the patient. How many patients had post-op neuralgia and donor area both in strip and FUE? Venkat sir, you have been doing both.
You do say this occasionally, but what is important is FE patients do complain of this. It's not that FE doesn't get it, probably they get it as much as FUT patients, and it often persists for quite some time, often 2 months or even 3 months. So while the immediate post-operative period is quite comfortable in FE and they recover fairly fast, some patients they do get this kind of neuralgic pain, and then pregabalin is one good option. Intralesional steroid into that area is also a good option in such cases.
Okay. So anything specifically you do to prevent this thing in FUE?
I suppose it is due to the trauma to the small nerve fibers which happens there. And you can't avoid trauma because that's what you are basically doing. So over harvesting should be avoided. But beyond that, it's a minor thing. Most patients can be educated about it and it usually passes away.
And if we go too much deep, I think avoiding going too much deep can be prevented because there are some punches which have a very long length. Do you think that could have something to do with this?
I suppose if the nerve fibers have to get damaged, they can get damaged at any level. After all, they have to come up. You can damage larger nerve fibers if you go deep. But even otherwise, the superficial nerve fibers also can get damaged.
Okay, good. So this is actually managing the patient. This is the same patient which we had discussed in the morning, in which we had some hair left behind in the crown area. And this patient had undergone strip and we were discussing of retrograde alopecia. So this is what might happen in a patient when the, we said that even in strip, we have seen the cases where retrograde alopecia can come. And this gentleman was now not bothered about the hair on the top. He was bothered about hair in the donor area. He wanted his scar to get covered up. So, and we did beard harvesting of grafts from here and covered it up. So moving on to the recipient area, how many of you have seen a complication in the recipient area after transplant? I would like to have the opinion of the house, starting from Viral.
5 to 10%.
5 to 10%.
5 to 10.
I don't know whether you call that a complication, but a lot of patients recipient area nowadays especially complain a lot of itching, boils, non-specific folliculitis. That is a complication. Average 5 to 10%.
5%.
So if we are considering complication, is it short-term minor complications like itching, boils, it might be 5 to 10%.
Okay. So the consensus of the panel is that we will have around 5 to 10% of.
Major is hardly any complication.
Yes, the major is mainly that infection and all that. We hardly see the necrosis and all that stuff. We hardly see nowadays. Anybody from the floor wants to discuss any different type of a complication within the donor or the recipient area which we are not covered?
Different topic.
Different topic. We don't have open house right now. Sorry for that.
Some patients complain of hardness on recipient area which lasts for a few days or months.
So question is for the panel.
So
Some people feel hardness.
Is mostly due to the numbness which persists for longer duration because the surgical edema and regeneration of nerve fibers. So mostly we have to advise after 15 days of surgery, he can start massaging with any type of oil. Massaging reduces the edema. It might be a lymphatic edema, it might be surgical edema, or numbness due to hyposthesia of local nerves and superficial nerves. So the patient which perceives the hardness is not actually the hardness, it's mostly the numbness which he perceives as a hardness. So massage is the answer for that. A pressure massage for 10 to 15 minutes every day, starting 15 days post-op to be continued for 2 months or 3 months post-operatively.
Okay. Next.
I just want to add one comment that I am a hair transplant surgeon since 2 years now, so I am very juvenile in the learning curve. And I had 2 major complications of acute effluent because of the over-harvesting.
Sorry?
Telogen effluent or
Okay.
over-harvesting.
Okay.
And when I retrospectively seen both the cases, and the team was, or I was patient-driven by the demand because some of the patients did travel to the city, and because of the same social media, they're like, we want 4,000 grafts only, and then when the patient, consultant's judgment is 3,500, we try to achieve 4,000 to convince the patient or to prove yourself, and then we'll end up in a complication. So there's a thing which I have learned that believe into your own judgment and don't get patient driven, then you may feel the complication you may face.
Point well taken. I think having done a lot of surgeries, I feel that 4,000 is really very, very far-fetched number. By a few in one sitting, you're bound to go too close, which might affect the vascularity in that area. So coming on to how often do you do the implantation yourself? Only hairline? Not at all. Occasionally, always. So what is the opinion of the house? Because this is something which is going to depend, it is correlated to the number of complications that you see in the recipient area.
Sir, implantation should be divided into 2 parts if we are doing pre-slit method and single if we are doing stick and place or implanter pins. So people who are adopting pre-slit methods, generally they make their slits by their own always because it's not a too much time consuming process. So
What do you do?
I do pre-slit method, I make
So
slits always.
you don't place the graft yourself?
Never ever.
I don't do.
Never ever.
So you've never done. I used to do it, but I have given up. Dr. Manoj.
I always used to do pre-slit. And let me bring a statistic in front of all of you. In Japan, when they do a bypass surgery, everything's done by the surgeon. But the anastomosis of the 2 vessels is done by young nurses, not the surgeon. Because the hands of the young nurses are steadier and better to take bites in that minute vessel to anastomose them. I am 61, my staff, of course, much younger, 25, 30, 35, 40. Their hands are more steadier than mine, A. B, they do it day in and day out. So I have hardly done any implantation myself. Yes, I will do if I'm doing an eyebrow and they're finding it tough. I'm doing a lip implantation in the philtrum, they find it tough. Some areas where difficult, the technique is a little difficult, you go explain, do it yourself, show it to them, that's different. Otherwise, in the scalp, I hardly do it.
Okay.
Many patients ask me, I said, I've never done it.
So Venkat sir, out of the 4 choices, just the choices, we have a lot of questions to cover.
Occasionally.
Occasionally you do, which area do you do?
No, what I do is at the end I go about half an hour, 45 minutes before the surgery. And then I follow the pre-slit method, but where there are gaps, where they are not able to put it, I do slit and place there, or we use implanters at that time. And then I also put on a loop and check whether any particular site is not implanted, and I make sure that it's filled up.
Sumit, choice.
I do only hairline, but by that time I get a number of grafts, how many 2 hair, 3 hair grafts, and then I instruct
So
my
you
staff
do
how
it
to place
only
that.
hairline. Viral.
We do one-step implantation, team of doctors, all plastic surgeons or dermat, and every entire implantation only done by us, by the doctors, not by the technicians.
Okay, so my purpose of bringing up this slide was that we are, as surgeons, we are very much obsessed only with the part that we do. But hair transplant is not only taking out of grafts or harvesting. Slit making and implantation is an equally important part to which perhaps we never give that much of importance. And without having a properly trained team and ourselves being trained enough to train them and supervise them, without these things it is not possible to give the results. So we should be giving an equal focus on implantation along with the harvesting. So let's skip up this because so this is another patient I want to ask. Suneet had presented this type of a case in which he had removed the grafts. Suneet, I want to ask this. We had also removed the graft from the same area, from the angle. This is my patient. So I would like to know from you, what is the experience when you try to take out the grafts? Is there any change in approach while taking out of the grafts by FUE?
So while extracting these implanted grafts, most of the time these are not in unidirection. The directions are very different in different places. Each and every graft have different angle direction. So obviously we have to make sure that we should explain the patient that we can't extract all the grafts in one go. He might require one more session in future, and later he might come after for laser also for reducing the final things which are left out. So obviously we have to use punches which are not very broad because it might lead to scarring. I generally use around 0.9 and it's almost acceptable scarring in front. It gives pretty decent extraction as well as acceptable scarring.
Do you find scarring in this area after taking out of grafts?
Initially yes, but with time, with passage of time, it improves and doesn't show much.
Yes, so 2 points over here I would like to share that. One, while you are trying to take out the graft from this angle, we are not used to taking out the graft. So the position is different, the angle is different, as a result of which there are bound to be some transactions. And there are some here which are always left behind. So when we are going with the patient, like everybody said, don't be a superhero and tell him I will remove everything in one go. Because it is difficult to remove out all the grafts. If I am attempting 100, I might be able to take out 80. But those 20 which will be left, which have been transacted and attempted at that point of time, they are going to grow back, and then the patient will again say to you that you had promised me everything will be done in one go. So this is something which you should take care of. And as Sumit has said, in this very patient we had taken out the grafts, and then we also had to do the laser hair removal. We used the diode laser sittings to remove these grafts. So a combination of the things may be required to remove the grafts. So managing an unsatisfied patient in the opinion of the panel, what is more common, subjective failure or objective failure? By subjective, I mean that the patient thinks that there is a failure. And by objective means both of us know that the grafts have not come out, like Dr. Manoj Khanna had shown a case. So
always 50-50. So 50% cases are subjective, 50 are objective. Always.
okay. Good number, 50-50.
Failure is failure.
So that well said, but the point is sometimes as a surgeon you know that you have not done that. And there's a difference in the number of grafts.
Psychiatric surgery.
Good.
So naturally that part is not in your hands.
To an extent what he says is true, failure is failure, but there are sometimes when you think that the result is decent, but the patient doesn't agree with you. Because I think there it's a question of aligning his expectations. As I said, you will have dealt with it in the consultation, but whether he remembers it later, that is an entirely different issue.
Yes.
You may have it in the consent form. In my case, it is there in the video also. But all that is not useful if he is there upset and unhappy. Because it was your job to ultimately take care of it. Otherwise, it will get worse. So these two are totally different issues.
Yes, sir, please.
Do all of you counsel your patients yourself, or you have people employed to do the counseling?
So that was the next question.
I do both the primary counseling and the preoperative counseling myself. I don't have any counselor in my clinic.
Coming to the previous one, I think subjective failures are more common now with time, but and coming to the counseling point, yeah, all the patients are counseled by me. Unless I'm traveling once in a while, the patient is comfortable meeting a junior doctor, which is very rare, but otherwise 99% I can say is counseled by me.
Anybody having a difference of opinion? Anybody who uses counselors?
Sir, I use counselor for primary counseling of the procedure, like how the procedure goes, what are the complications, side effects, and what should be the things which can be he can have, like FUT, FUE, body hair, PRP, all that. But all the patients should be personally counseled before doing surgery, because as you asked previously, unsatisfied patient, I feel majority of cause of unsatisfaction is the mismatch between the patient expectation and what you can provide. So counseling should be done 100% by the surgeon himself prior going for the surgery. He should understand the expectation of the patient as well as explain what is best possible.
So
You want me to answer or no?
Yes, sir, please. Let me quickly run through.
You're answering all my trade secrets out. When a patient comes to my office, I show him a video of a consultation detail of a hair transplant, which is about 8-9 minutes talked by me. Recently, for the last couple of years, I have a counselor. Then the patient goes to a counselor, talks to him, discusses with him, sees videos of patients like him, etc., etc. Then the patient comes to me. And I talk to the patient in detail, and I don't ask the patient to leave the office. When the patient wants to leave the office, he will leave the office. You have to be patient. He's going to pay a certain amount of money. So let him ask all his questions till he's happy and he gets up and says, I'm going, keep talking. So that is my consult. I always talk to all my patients.
I agree. Many of us are using, and in fact, we personally use a manager to counsel the patient or the other doctor to do that. But I make sure that all the, firstly, he is allowed to ask me any amount of questions. And then even if he says he doesn't have any questions, I do tell him 3 main steps. Number one, that I will be doing full trimming, because sometimes they don't even understand that in FUE they have to undergo trimming. Number 2 thing is, I tell them that I am going to do 2 parts, slit making and harvesting myself. Putting it back is done by the team, because sometimes patient understand doctor karega means all the 3 steps are to be done. And number 3 thing, I always tell him that hair transplant results are not 100%. There might be a chance that you might get slightly less than optimal results, for which you might require a surgery again. Because I don't believe that this is part which is the most common cause of causing a discomfort or unsatisfaction of the patient.
May I say something? See, my consent form has one section wherein it specifies what will be done by the nurse, what will be done by the doctor. It is exactly specified, this step will be done, it's a table. Step, who does it? Donor, recipient.
Yes.
Each is specified, and then he separately signs for that section. This I did after I had a discussion with one of the medical legal lawyers. If a patient objects that you didn't do this, the answer is, have you informed who will do what?
Yes.
So I think your consent form should specify what is it that you will do, what is it that the assistants do.
Yeah, the
and the
same
video
thing I want to
consent-
support on this, we have made also the same form, but not with the major consent form. We have taken it as a consent, as a secondary consent, and when we fix up the plan, the surgery, we always explain them who is going to do what, number one. When the patient is booked and when we ask the investigation or send the investigation on phone, again we tell him. And third time when he comes for the surgery, that form is given to them and signature is taken at. Because in spite of explaining and taking the signature, patients forget for which he has signed. So we have made it a point that 2 or 3 points we tell him that these are the things. But one thing I want to ask you.
इतनी बार बोलने पे डर जाएगा वो.
नहीं.
और शायद सर्जरी ना करवाए.
One thing I want to ask you. If you have taken this thing legally in a consent, official consent, and in the code, can we produce in the code this consent that the implantation in a slit made by the surgeon can be done by nursing staff?
I think so, definitely. This is there in ISHRS and it is there in EHRS. And
If it
in the
is-
guidelines that we have drafted, we have mentioned the same.
Yes.
And it is there in our textbook also.
Yes.
So it
The
can be done
who-
legally?
Court, the judge does not know who has to do what. It is we are the experts. So if we say it, yes.
Because
If
at
it is
some
an acceptable,
one place in
it is an
meeting,
acceptable, level of care which we are providing to the patient. Overall responsibility is with the doctor only, but still they can do. Just like laser, there is a, everybody knows that in facial hair removal there are laser technicians, and there is a insurance available for the laser technicians who are working with you. So I think that it should be legal.
it's a legal thing. You must have worked on it.
Okay.
Just on the consent form, whatever you may ask the patient to sign, I feel if he writes down in synopsis what has been told to him in his own hand, that is having a lot of validity in the court of law as compared to him
I
signing.
agree with you. Let me just say this. In the only medical legal case that I had, the patient, by the way, a patient, when he comes to me, he signs in 5 or 6 or 7 places. We have a separate consent form for each type of procedure. If it is vertex, that's a separate consent. FUT is a separate consent. Beard is a separate consent. It is like that. And then in that particular case, in addition to all that, the patient writes a paragraph in his or her handwriting, in addition to everything. Because in that case, the judge had asked the question, why is it a typed form? Why is it not written down? There, of course, my lawyer had answered that you can't write down 2 pages or 3 pages. But I make it a point that after everything, something is written in the hand, and if there is something specific for that case, that is also written in hand.
Yes.
This is very important.
So there are two more points regarding unhappy patients which we are facing nowadays. One is related to the billing. Well, hair transplant is GST is supposed to be charged on this, but there are a lot of people in the private who are not doing that. So just a word of caution for them. It can get you into trouble anytime. One last, that how many of you have had the problem that the patient said that I got less number of grafts? Anybody has had this type of problem?
It's very common. It's not uncommon at all. People will come and tell you, especially who are not happy or who think that 2,000 grafts will fill the full head. I did 2,000 and you have only covered this much. It's a very common thing.
So how much in percentage would be the same?
The percentage will depend on the percentage of psychiatric patients.
But okay, out of the house, how many of you have faced this problem? Patient said that after the surgery, the number of grafts were less. Yes, I personally feel sometimes the patient have said that, but we get that extraction or sheet signed by the patient. We give him a full chart that what all things have been done. Still, sometimes the patient feels that I might not have got. So this is something which we need to be careful, especially when people are just extrapolating that.
Just the point, it is not about the number of grafts, but it is the coverage that they have achieved. It is, the connotation is not on the number, but what final achievement is the cover. If they are not happy with the cover, they will
So
construe
the
it
moment
as...
they go out of the operation theatre, 3 days down the line, they will meet somebody more intelligent than me and you who will say, no, you are not right. This does not look like 2,000. So thank you very much. Thank you to all the panel.
One point.
Sir,
Okay, one minute.
it's very true that people will say it's not 2,000, but from your side, always try to give more. That is, should be in the safe hand. That you, if you promise 2,000, give 2,300, 400, 500. If you promise
Good.
anything, do at
You're being
least.
too generous.
You should do.
Good
At
boy,
least
good
there,
boy.
There should not be any controversy later. Again, before that, at counseling part, it should be made clear that nobody is going to count the grafts as a patient. You are not going to count the grafts, or neither I can make you count. So the better understanding, you should be sure that what is the area of coverage you are giving and what is the density in different parts which you should expect.
We do make them count. We have the Patri dish in which you can arrange 100 or 200.
So 100, he can't count every graft.
No,
You have
no,
to
he
believe
can.
that these are 100 grafts.
No, if you come to that, it can be easily done. You don't do it, that's a separate thing, but
It's not
it can
easy,
be
not
easily-
easy.
Not
da.
easy. I don't
Chalo
feel
sir,
it's
I have
easy.
also been now doing
Okay.
for 15 years.
The
I'm
point I
doing
would
it.
like to finish is, about 4 years ago, a patient done by Venkat in Bangalore came to me for after a hair transplant, and I thought result was good. What Venkat had on his sheet is so many grafts were transplanted, so many single hair transplanted, so many 2 hair transplants, so many 3 hair transplants. Once you do this, and I've started doing after that, I always write whatever I've done to the patient. All those fussy patients who are worried that you have charged 3,000, you have put 2,000, you have this. If you keep in writing, a lot of the patients keep quiet.
Yes.
Because the doctor written it down. So it's a very good practice. Everybody should do that. You write down exactly what you have done. The moment you mention what you have done, lot of that apprehension or wonder or ye chori kar raha hai, jhoot bol raha hai, is curtailed and the patient is much more satisfied.
So I think we should all learn from Dr. Venkat and try to put down as much as possible on the paper. So I would like to thank all the panelists for this and thank you from the entire team of AK Clinic. This was my last presentation. So
Thank you all the panel for an excellent discussion. Now we come to a very interesting session, which is non-patent hair loss and relevance to hair transplant surgeon. Could I please call upon Dr. Narendra Pradhan sir to kindly moderate the session, please?
Friends, we are coming to session number 14. We'd like to curtail the panel discussion because most of the topics will be covered. Our panelists are all our speakers are dermatologists, and we'll be talking about this is a printing mistake. It is not pattern. It is a non-pattern hair loss, and we'll be discussing about this. Dr. Mrs. Rajput, Sattur madam, please. बैठे रहो अमन all right, basically this is by the dermatologist, so it is meant for our surgeon friends. Hope they are here. If not, they probably have gone outside. We'll be talking about non-pattern hair loss and its relevance to hair transplant surgeons. My first speaker is Dr. Amit Kerure, and he is going to talk on alopecia areata in hair transplant practice. Amit is given 7 minutes and hope he sticks to the time. Amit, please.
Thank you, sir. Alopecia areata in hair transplant. As we know that alopecia areata is recurrent non-scarring hair loss affecting any hair-bearing area, it is usually temporary and respond to the medical management. The epithelial cell and melanocytes in the hair follicle are altered in alopecia areata with an increase in Langerhans and T cells. So it's hair follicle specific autoimmune disease triggered by environmental factor in genetically susceptible people. So immune prevention site is compromised in alopecia areata with increased expression in histocomparative complexes and decrease in naturally occurring immunosuppressive proteins, thus activating T cell autoantibodies and promote cytokine release, mainly perifollicular, leading to dystrophic and miniaturized hair. So why not hair transplant for alopecia areata? Because it is temporary, recurrent, and we really don't know the course. It is most unpredictable condition in dermatology. Hair transplant is not the routine treatment. Usually it responds to the medical management. It is autoimmune condition. So if you put hair, again it will be taken up by the autoantibodies or T lymphocytes. So the chances of post-surgery recurrence and disease activation are there. But when can we think about hair transplant? If the area affected by alopecia areata is small and has remained unchanged for several years, and if biopsy shows no inflammation below the scalp, hair transplantation could be considered. So there was a case published by Ungar. Also there was one more case in IJDVL. So I got a case who was an MBBS student. He was doing his internship and he had alopecia areata patch since last 8.5 years. And he met so many dermatologists. He didn't get any response. The lesion was totally burnt out. And he came to me, he was aware of alopecia areata and the treatment modalities, and he asked for FUE. Frankly, I was very much scared to do this case because in our MD course, we are always taught that this is most unpredictable condition, you can't touch it and all. But then I thought of doing a biopsy, and I did a biopsy. Every time I do a biopsy in scarring alopecia or non-scarring alopecia, I always ask for activity I write in my form that I want to know the activity because I am planning for FUE, something like that. So the dermatopathologist sent the report that this is totally inactive condition and you can go ahead for FUE. So this was the biopsy report. So I told him that we can take hair from the shadow area of the beard, so that we can get the most natural look. And this is immediately after the surgery. And this was after 2 weeks. He sent me photograph. But I was always worried that what will happen next. So I gave him oral mini pulse for almost 4 weeks. And exactly 2 days back, I called him and I asked him to send his recent photographs. He sent these recent photographs. Here he has got very nice density. There's little bit thinning is there, but it's just 6 months. So I'm still waiting for some more result at the end of 1 year. This was this photograph. This case was sent to me by one dermatologist saying it's alopecia areata, but I knew that this is tractional alopecia because already I had treated such 2-3 cases. And I did a biopsy and it came to be a tractional alopecia, and I did hair transplant, and this was the result after hair transplant. I have sent this case for publication. So when to think of hair transplant? Small, localized in a well-defined area, long-standing, the condition should be stable. There shouldn't be any family history or autoimmune condition. In two cases, both were doctors. One was doctor anesthetist and one was dentist. I had alopecia. I realized that patient has alopecia areata on the table, because whenever these medico come to you, they come with clean shave. And I was planning 2-day session. On the second day, I saw there was a small patch in the beard. So when I asked, both the patients were unaware of that thing. So I started oral mini pulse. For one patient, I continued for 6 weeks. For one patient, I continued for 8 weeks, and nothing happened. Everything went perfect. I did ILS also. These are my cases. Yes, these are my cases, and I face this issue back to back for 4 cases in 2 weeks. I'm practicing hair transplant since last 6 years, and this happened in 2018 December, and I was so scared. In 2 weeks, 4 cases back to back. So I did this trichoscopy and all. It was looking classically alopecia areata, but I was not sure that this is not alopecia areata. Definitely this looks like shock loss. So I called Patwardhan sir, Mysore sir, I contacted Dr. Alice Ginsberg, my teacher, and everybody gave their different opinion. But then I did biopsy. I sent it to Cyan, and it came to be, there was a mucin deposition around the hair follicle, if you see. So they say this is a vascular compromisation, maybe because of either over harvesting, or maybe because of some other factor. But I know that I don't do over harvesting. One of my surgeon friend told me to change the adrenaline sample, whatever I had in my clinic. And he said sometimes you get a batch which doesn't have the appropriate quantity. So I immediately changed the batch, and it never happened to me. And these are the patients, they got the hair back after oral and injectable these steroids. And we sent this case series to JACAS, and it got accepted. Now it will be published in this coming issue, where we have termed this condition as a DAAE, that is donor area acute effluvium, because all the hair were in this acute effluvium. That condition was acute effluvium, it was not telogen effluvium. It looks like alopecia areata trichoscopically and clinically. Sometimes there is hair pull test positive. So the take home message is, if the area is affected by alopecia areata, it's small and has remained unchanged for several years, and if biopsy shows no inflammation below the scalp, hair transplantation could be considered. Thank you.
Anyway, thank you, Amit. Our second presentation is by Mubashir, and he is going to talk on hair transplantation. Amit, hair transplantation in cicatricial alopecia. Again, time given to him is 7 minutes. Thank you.
Very good evening to everybody. I'll be discussing regarding, my talk is on cicatricial alopecia as far as transplant is concerned. So these are the patients which come to us as far as scarring is concerned. Hair transplantation scarring alopecia can be more challenging. Inflammatory stage of scarring alopecia must be inactive, and reactivation of the inflammatory stage may also occur post-transplant and lead to loss of transplanted hairs. So proper diagnosis of scarring alopecia entails performing a detailed history and scalp examination. Additionally, scalp biopsy is highly recommended. Transplant should be performed into primary, can be divided into primary cicatricial alopecia if it involves, and disease activity is inactive for 1 or 2 years, or disease should be quiescent and we do not anticipate further progression of disease. So as far as signs and symptoms is concerned, affected areas of the scalp have redness, scaling, increased or decreased pigmentation, pustules or draining sinuses. Hair loss happens quickly and can cause severe itching, pain and burning. Some cases may show signs of inflammation. In few cases, the inflammation that destroys the hair follicle is below the skin surface and there is usually no scar seen on the scalp. The affected scalp is usually left bare and smooth without hair and without the usual pore markings. So as far as cicatricial alopecia is concerned, it can be divided as primary or secondary. As far as proposed working classification of primary cicatricial alopecia is concerned, it can be group 1 either lymphocytic, or it can be in group 2 neutrophilic, group 3 mixed, and group 4 non-specific. So there's a potential of permanent destruction of hair follicle. It is caused as a result of irreversible damage to the epithelial hair follicle stem cells. Cicatricial alopecia has 2 forms. In the primary form, the target is the destructive process of the hair follicle. In the secondary form, the hair follicle is a bystander, destroyed by another cause. This can be due to severe burn, infection, radiation, or tumor. So if the stem cells and sebaceous glands are destroyed, there is no possibility for regeneration of the hair follicle, leading to permanent hair loss. Cicatricial alopecias are not contagious. Cicatricial alopecias can be either a primary process whereby it directly attacks the hair follicles, or by secondary process whereby it indirectly attacks the hair follicles. The actual mechanism that causes scarring alopecia involves destruction of the top section of the hair follicles. So what are the investigations which should be done? As far as dermatoscopy, which we already discussed, biopsies are very much important. 2 biopsies of 4 mm pus should be taken. 1 biopsy should be sectioned vertically and should be divided into 2, one for DIF and other for H&E staining. The second biopsy should be sent for horizontal. Can you please take the slide back? It's going. No. So as far as histopathology is concerned, we should take 2, not back. So the biopsy identifies which type of cells is involved, wherein how much inflammation is present, and whether the glands are present or not. The biopsy shall help us to diagnose the type of cicatricial alopecia, and microbiological evaluation like skin swabs from the pus or exudate, and even the portion of scalp biopsy should be taken. So a hair pull test can be done to identify areas of active disease where hairs are easily pulled. A microscopic evaluation can be done for the hair bulbs to determine if the hairs are pulled out in the hair pull test as resting hairs or growing hairs. So what are the things which we should do as far as transplantation is concerned? Packing of the grafts should not be too dense. Chubby grafts containing 2 to 4 follicles are ideal as far as scarring alopecia is concerned. It is highly recommended to perform a small test area before undergoing a large transplantation session. A 1 to 2 square centimeter area can be transplanted initially. So in 9 to 12 months, depending on the assessment of graft survival in the test area, a large session can be performed. Ideally, we should take 10 to 25 units depending upon the scarring. Per unit centimeter square is recommended. The patient is counseled that 2 to 4 sessions may be needed to perform after every 9 to 12 months minimum, and that with each session, high densities can be achieved. So candidates for hair transplant, as far as cicatricial is concerned, if are having very high cicatricial scarring is there, they should have good donor area. Minoxidil 5% must be started 2 to 3 months before surgery and after surgery. As far as vasodilatation is concerned, there are some studies of autologous fat transplantation can also be tried to enhance graft uptake. If possible, use of plain lignocaine should be used, adenine should be limited, and use of blades and slits should be better depth control. So in primary scarring alopecia, there's a tendency of progression and to recur intermittently with time. Medical therapy should be initiated as soon as possible before irreversible scarring occurs. Hair transplantation can be taken only in non-active and stable primary scarring alopecias. And it is advisable to confirm the disease being inactive for at least 2 years. This is very much important as far as cicatricial alopecia is concerned. These are some of the patients. This patient was a guy who had a scarring due to chirion. And this is the way we did one session of hair transplantation, and we're expecting him back, and his donor was good. This is a girl who had a history of accident due to severe burn. Eyebrow transplantation was done, and these are the results we can see. Facial cicatricial alopecia because of burn, and eyebrow, this face hair transplantation was done. Again, a patient who had some history of burn, and it was operated by plastic surgeons. Hair transplantation was done. These are the results. So along with these hair restoration surgery, following procedures can be performed specially as far as plastic surgeon is concerned. They can go for scalp repair using tissue expanders, serial scalp reduction, scalp reduction, and the Frechet triple flap repair, transposition of scalp flaps, repair of wide donor scars, multiple W-plasties, along with follicular grafting with micropigmentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mubashir. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is a very well-known teacher from Mumbai. She is Dr. Chitra Nayak, head of the department KM Hospital, Mumbai. And she is going to talk on hair loss in pediatric age group. So over to Dr. Chitra. She is given 12 minutes.
Thank you very much, organizers of HairCon 2020, and especially Dr. Sandeep Satur for giving me this opportunity. So we see a lot of children with hair loss, and the common causes would be telogen effluvium, tinea capitis, alopecia areata, bacterial infections leading to scarring alopecia, traction alopecias, and trichotillomania. We also see less common causes like some systemic illnesses, like in planopilaris also, sometimes in our children, malnutrition, structural abnormalities, and usually it's correction of those. Structural abnormalities like hair shaft disorders, etc. So far we don't really have any great treatments for them. So tinea capitis, we have the various kinds, the non-inflammatory and the inflammatory, which is Favus and chirion, which usually leads to cicatrization. Favus we don't see commonly. It is usually said to be more common in Kashmir, where they wear the skull caps. The way the fungus affects the hair shaft, it's called ectothrix or endothrix, depending on whether the spores are on the surface or within the hair shaft. So the tinea capitis, which is black dot or gray patch, we see minimal inflammation. We may see a green fluorescence with Woods lamp examination, but you could get non-fluorescent also. So you see the black dot where you can see the patchy hair loss, and you can see how there is a follicular prominence with black dot appearance at the follicles. And you can see the gray patch, which is these scaly patches. The child has been shaved by the parents because of they didn't like the patchy hair loss. Now the inflammatory ones, so in all these cases you need to treat. The non-inflammatory ones will improve without leaving any kind of scarring if you treat them well. The inflammatory ones will scar. So you see a boggy swelling with a purulent discharge. It's often, sometimes the patient comes a little late to us because some GP has been treating it only with antibiotics and they haven't identified that it's actually a fungal infection, and they usually have considerable lymphadenopathy. Sometimes you see visible lymph nodes in the neck area, and you often get a co-infection with some bacteria. So both are chirion, but one is even more inflammatory than the other, the one on the left. Now the important thing, that is the practice that I follow, is you always have to treat with oral antifungals when you're handling chirion, because it's a deeper infection and it will not respond only to topicals. Secondly, there is a lot of hypersensitization of the immune system. So you have to the moment you start giving antifungals, this hypersensitization just goes haywire and you might find the patient just oozing from the entire lesion and feeling very miserable. The parents will keep running back. So I always give a small dose of corticosteroids and a short course. A lot of people are not in favor of giving corticosteroids in pediatric age group, but I have found that it really doesn't work if you don't give a short course of corticosteroids. And I also believe that giving the short course of corticosteroids may reduce the scarring alopecia eventually. And this is of course a picture, not our patient, where we see these scutulae or cup-shaped crusts and a lot of matting and extensive patchy hair loss may be seen in these patients. So we do KOH scraping in our department, and biopsies we rarely do in tinea, of course. And like you have to also examine the child carefully if there's any fungal infection on other parts of the body surface area. The important principle is to see in the family who has, ask for history of pets and see if the pets need treatment, and also the class fellows, the child's schoolmates, playmates, whatever, they all need to be treated. Otherwise, it can always recur. So KOH mount will show the hyphae. Now, we use itraconazole in older children, but we can use griseofulvin and terbinafine, and we also additionally use topical antifungals. That's also very important because it may help in shedding from the surface, so infecting other children may be reduced by use of this. Now, alopecia areata, we see that a little bit more in the males, at least, that we have seen in our department. And it has been said that there is an Epstein-Barr virus in children, which a virus infection in children, which may trigger off alopecia areata. So you also have to screen for other diseases like vitiligo, hypothyroidism, diabetes mellitus. And we usually correlate the nail changes, which is often pitting. Sometimes you may see onycholysis, splitting, etc. of the nail also. And 10%, up to 10% of the cases may have body hair loss like eyebrows, eyelashes and other parts of the body. So these are some of our children. So you can see a reticular pattern, you can see a almost subtotalis and more widespread. So now based on all this, if you take a biopsy, you will see a swarm of bees appearance, and you get a mixed telogen dystrophic pattern on trichogram. So all of you are familiar with this exclamation hair which are seen, and you see the yellow dots which may have keratin usually or sebum in them, and you see the coudability, the kinking of the hair, which is what gives you the coudability sign because of the thinning of the hair shaft, basically proximal thinning. And sometimes you see these other many dots, which are usually the eccrine gland openings on the surface of the scalp. And again, you see the proximal thinning of the hair shafts. This is the characteristic swarm of bees appearance. When it comes to treatment, now steroids again people frown upon. There are some pediatric dermatologists who promote, who are very fond of using cyclosporin. Now I majorly see patients at Nair Hospital, and I can tell you that people who come to Nair Hospital will not be able to afford even those few thousand rupees a month for the cyclosporin, especially when it has to be given sometimes for a prolonged period of time. So we are very familiar with the use of methotrexate, we are very familiar with the use of azathioprine. Methotrexate, believe me, works very well and it is very safe in children. And we use it in quite a lot of our children, apart from alopecia, also areata, for also other conditions. Excimer lasers, etc. can be used if you have it. And then, of course, you have the prostaglandin analogs like latanoprost, bimatoprost. So I've had reasonably good results for eyelash loss and eyebrow loss in my patients of alopecia areata, where they have responded to systemic therapy, but the eyelashes or eyebrows were not responding. And when I added, to take the brand name Lashisma, I found that the patient did pretty well. So we also practice, once the patient is on systemic therapy, if we find some resistant patches, then using anthralin in the form of Derobin ointment works pretty well. We use fairly regularly allergic sensitizer, dicyclopropanone, DPCP. So tacrolimus topically is used by us, and I have found when single patches, sometimes tacrolimus 0.01% ointment alone has given good results within about 6 to 8 weeks. So this is our patient whom we had done DPCP treatment. Unfortunately, we do see these side effects like irritant contact dermatitis, because first you have to apply a 2% solution and you may get irritant contact dermatitis, blister formation, sometimes you get urticaria, contact dermatitis at the site of application, contact leukoderma. So other reported therapies are sulfasalazine, which we have never used, and biologic agents, JAK inhibitors are the newest things which are postulated to be very good, and they have been studied, but except for tofacitinib, which is available in India, none of the others which are mentioned in this slide are available here. And even tofacitinib, when I calculated, would work out very expensive for the patient. I think it would be like many thousands of rupees a month. So way more expensive than even cyclosporin. So it is not definitely feasible for my patients at the moment. Telogen effluvium we see very often in adults, sometimes in children. Now when it comes to pediatrics and adolescent children, we have to remember that a lot of our adolescents are already showing signs of androgenetic alopecia. So it's very important that we do not treat our adolescents as if just telogen effluvium and just reassurance. And we use therapies like minoxidil, etc. And what I am horrified to find is many of my youngster patients have very poor diets. So they need a lot of dietary counseling. Many of the girls are anemic and they're eating a lot of junk food. So we do a lot of dietary counseling for them. And so you can get a considerable appearance of thinning when it's acute telogen effluvium, which is very worrisome to the patient or to the guardian, and you have to counsel them. But like I said, if they are adolescents, then use treatments like minoxidil also additionally. And after 6 months, if the patient has stabilized again, then you know for sure it was only telogen effluvium. Trichotillomania we see both in children and adults. The adults usually have some psychiatric morbidity. Children don't really have very psychiatric morbidity, but very bad psychiatric morbidity. Usually psychotherapy works with them. And I'm sure they have, it's like a habit tic, you know, they tend to twirl the hair around the fingers and pull it, especially if they're watching television or, you know, something may be occupying their mind. And that's how you see this patchy loss, and you see hair broken at different levels. So on dermoscopy, you appreciate fraying of ends, breakage at different lengths, and usually there is no inflammation on the skin of the scalp. So you can see the tulip hair, black dots, frayed hair, and like I said, they need psychotherapy, and they need to be distracted by the parents. They need to be kept occupied so they don't do this. Traction alopecia, this young girl of 8, this is a picture after we had counseled the mother and made her stop pulling back the hair, but you can see it's a really wide forehead which is more commonly seen in adults, and there is some amount of improvement in this picture here. Lichen planopilaris, we do see it in children. You can appreciate here the violaceous plaques and the cicatrization. Here also we find, so you get this peripilar casts, you get the hair casts which you see over here, you get honeycomb pigmentation when you see, and this is the gold standard, of course, is this histopathology, which is perifollicular inflammation, lichenoid inflammation. We can use corticosteroids, antimalarials. Again, we use a lot of methotrexate, it really works beautifully. And I would like to say here that there is a lot of worry about using these immunosuppressants, but we have a lot of experience and I can tell you it works very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chitra. You really covered this topic, a comprehensive topic, in 12 minutes. Our last speaker is Dr. Kumaran Sen, and he is going to talk on non-pattern hair loss mimicking pattern hair loss.
Good evening. Pattern hair loss is a very easy diagnosis to make clinically. Likewise, it's very easy to miss at sometimes also. I will present some clinical scenarios where we may misdiagnose androgenetic alopecia, and some conditions where it mimics androgenetic alopecia. These are images of two middle-aged boy and girl around 20s who was diagnosed as a diffuse unpatterned alopecia and was treated for androgenetic alopecia for 1 year and not responding well to the regular treatment. Another 28-year-old lady was treated as Ludwig 2 to 3, was not responding to regular medications and was referred for the possibility of hair transplantation. All these three patients clinically resembled an androgenetic alopecia resemblance, but on clinical an examination, hair pull test was positive throughout the scalp. And trichoscopic examination revealed multiple yellow dots, exclamation marks, and regrowing terminal hairs. All these three cases are alopecia areata. Generally, it's usually acute in onset, but rarely we get chronic cases also. Chronic cases resemble patterned hair loss. Histopathology is considered to be the gold standard in diagnosing alopecia areata, but trichoscopy alone will give a clinical clue. Presence of exclamation marks, uniform yellow dots, and high number of growing terminal hairs is a finding that goes more in favor of alopecia areata. Alopecia areata occurs in all sizes and shapes. This is an image where this is basically a pediatric age group. We can see a bilaterally symmetrical receding of hairline just mimicking the male pattern hair loss. And there is another boy who had a clinical picture of Dupa, but this is a case of alopecia areata. So we should have a high index of suspicion to diagnose alopecia areata always. This is an image of a 30-year-old female with hair loss more than 6 months duration. At the outset, it looks like androgenetic alopecia. The history was of massive hair loss, and careful examination showed receding hairline, particularly bitemporal receding of hairline. This is not usually seen in androgenetic alopecia. And trichoscopy showed empty follicles, multiple regrowing hair follicles. This is a case of telogen effluvium. There are two types of telogen effluvium, acute and chronic. Acute can be easily diagnosed. Chronic telogen effluvium mimics androgenetic alopecia. The clinical features to diagnose from the history will be always a massive hair loss for a prolonged period and bitemporal receding of hairline in women should raise a suspicion of telogen effluvium. Histopathology shows absence of villous hair and absence of inflammation around the follicle, which is seen more in androgenetic alopecia. Trichoscopy shows empty follicles and multiple new growing hairs. Telogen effluvium is a diagnosis of exclusion. This is a 35-year-old female who had a hair loss of 3 years. It's on and off, not responding very well to the treatment, and was further referred for a hair transplant. But the clinical examination revealed something abnormal. Trichoscopy revealed all these findings: broken hairs, coiled hairs, flame hairs, V-sign, tulip hair, hair powders. All these findings goes more in favor of trichotillomania. Trichotillomania in a classical distribution is easy to diagnose, doesn't resemble androgenetic alopecia, but rarely there are some types which may mimic androgenetic alopecia. Histopathology is a gold standard in diagnosis, but trichoscopy alone will clinch the diagnosis. This is a 50-year-old female who presented with a typical male pattern androgenec alopecia with loss of frontal hair and loss of hair in the temporal region. The onset was only in the past 6 months. On history revealed a treatment for breast carcinoma within the past 6 months. This is a case of pseudo-androgenetic alopecia with male pattern distribution in females. This is due to a medication called aromatase inhibitors, which is administered for CA breast. Aromatase is an enzyme that is responsible for preserving the hairline in female, and aromatase inhibitors leads to enhanced activity of 5-alpha reductase and hence a clinical distribution of male pattern hair loss in women. Among the scarring alopecias, frontal fibrosing alopecia is one that may mimic androgenetic alopecia, particularly in men. It is characterized by complete loss of hair in the frontal region, receding temporal line, and the presence of lonely hairs is a clinical clue that differentiates this from androgenetic alopecia. And trichoscopy shows loss of follicular opening and follicular hyperkeratosis. Histopathology is the confirmatory diagnosis. There are few genetic conditions. These are very rare clinically, but these conditions may mimic androgenetic alopecia. This is a female, in the middle-aged female, was referred for higher hairline and possibility of hair transplant, but on examination revealed some abnormal faces. You can see the eyebrows is bushy in the medial aspect and sparse in the lateral aspect. Further examination showed short phalanges. This is another male who had extensive baldness, grade 7 resembling, but he had some abnormal faces, again short phalanges. These are cases of trichorhinophalangeal syndrome. It's autosomal dominantly inherited condition, defect in chromosome 8. Male are affected more than female. Hair loss starts around puberty, and they usually have a higher hairline, but may lead to complete hair loss also. Even body hair may also be affected. Temporal triangular alopecia is another condition which is usually unilateral and easy to diagnose, but 20% of bilateral. Then it may create a confusion with androgenetic alopecia. The onset is usually from the childhood, that gives a clue. Usually this is mistaken for more of alopecia areata than an androgenetic alopecia. Hereditary hypotrichosis simplex is an autosomal dominant inherited condition. It begins in childhood. Here there is gradual loss of hair. Either entire scalp may be involved or may mimic dupa also. But the clinical clue is here the body hairs are spared. So to summarize, the common imposters of androgenetic alopecia are alopecia areata, chronic telogen effluvium and trichotillomania. Other rare causes are pseudoandrogenetic alopecia and frontal fibrosing alopecia. The genetic conditions, although rare or we should be aware of, are temporal triangular alopecia, hereditary hypotrichosis simplex and trichorhinopharyngeal syndrome. Thank you.